There we go. I think we got people coming in. All right. Sounds good. Kevin Mcallister's in with us today. He says hello, but he lost his family again. I mean, that's how many times you got to get left alone, Kevin? Get left home alone. That's a terrible thing. But let me kind of get things sort of situated here. I think we're looking good. I'm on a monitor on that end. All right. I think everybody can see and hear me. I hope everybody enjoyed the little bit of George Strait Christmas time in Texas that led off today. It's a beautiful day here. Again, my name is Russell Graves. I'm coming to you live from the world headquarters of russellgraves.com, north of Dodge City, Texas, at out on what we call Hackberry Farm. And the picture you see in the background isn't actually Hackberry Farm, but this is a picture taken on a backcountry journeys trip to Yellowstone one winter. And that's always a great trip. So today we put reindeer and then Christmas trees and other holiday surprises in this because this is going to be kind of a free-flowing webinar today. I'm going to talk about some pictures. One of the requests that I've gotten from a couple of people is, I always do image critiques of other people's images. Some people ask me to put a few of my images on here and critique them and kind of talk backwards engineer them. What was I thinking? What was I seeing? What was I doing? In the basic settings on some of these pictures. I'll talk about some of that today. Mainly on the background images I'm using. We've got a little bit of some news coming up in 2020, a few things about what I learned in 2021 and what I hope to accomplish in 2022. And I want to hear from you guys. I mean, what's kind of at the top of your list as we go through this? I want to hear, sort of what you feel like is a big takeaway from you, photographically speaking, from 2021, and what you hope to accomplish in 2022. So I just want this to be a big, happy holiday sharing event today. I'm looking through the list of people, see a lot of names that are familiar. Hope you're doing well, David. And I see Tony's with us today, and Catherine. Catherine's living far up there in the north. I hope things are looking Christmassy where you're at, Catherine, in North Dakota. Got Molly here, and then Noel and Stan and Sandy, and this is a whole gang. I mean, this is a pretty good virtual, and Pat's here with us today. It's a pretty good virtual Christmas party we got going on. So again, welcome. My name's Russell Graves, coming to you live from Dodge City, Texas. I want to make this as much as a dialogue as a monologue. So as I go through this and we talk about some of the pictures and talk about some of the different things, I'm going to introduce you today about good news. Christmas came early. And I love Christmas, by the way. Story time. If you listen to these webinars, I love stories. I'm the youngest of 5 kids in my family. It's sister, brother, and then me. I'm the youngest of 5. And I remember growing up, Christmas was always a big deal in our household. And I come from blue collar people. My dad was a welder by trade, hardworking man, still lives right down the road from me, about a mile away. Mom is a stay-at-home mom. She worked hard to take care of us kids. She's still with us. She's about a mile down the road with my dad, and it's good to get to see them. But the thing that I remember most about Christmas growing up is, and I was thinking about this earlier this morning, is not necessarily about any one present I got. Because, I got some things that are memorable. I don't have any of them, but that shows how really memorable they were. That eventually you learn to grow away from material things. But the thing that I remember most about growing up in Christmas are big family gatherings and having all the family together, whether it's our immediate family and our extended family. We'd always have a big Christmas party like the Saturday before Christmas, or just Christmas Day with me and my brothers and sisters growing up, and that was always a great time. And so I am big on relationships and always have been. And, I consider the people I meet on these backcountry journey trips part of my growing family. So I just appreciate getting to spend this little bit of time with you guys today and getting to do my favorite thing, talk photography. Because if you've ever heard me say this before, you're speaking to the entire photography enthusiast community of Dodge City, Texas. I don't know that there's anybody else here that likes to talk photography. So anytime you give me a chance to talk photography and talk nature photography and cool locations and cameras and all that other stuff, I'm down for it. So again, welcome. Thank you guys for joining me today. And let's go ahead and get through this. So as I go through this, if you have any questions, just let me know, and I'll be sure to answer them as I go along. You know, I don't have any, I've only got a couple of pictures of caribou or otherwise reindeer. So our deer here in Texas are the big white-tailed deer. And somebody said the other day, I bet you never get snow in Texas, when in fact we do. Especially I live in North Texas. And so Texas is a big state. So if you go all the way up in the far Texas panhandle, they get more of a Midwest winter. But the further you go south down into the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, it's more like a Florida winter. So we've got that big range of landscape and a big range of winter. But this is one of my favorite pictures of deer I've ever taken in the snow before. And the thing this is where I'm going to break down a little bit. The thing that I really think works about this picture, and I'll tell you what I don't like about it in a minute, but the thing I think works about this picture is the fact that I like how the doe is out of focus and the buck is in focus. It kind of has a duality to it to me that tells a little bit of a story. The thing I don't like about it is I cropped a little bit too much of the deer's I framed it a little too close to the deer's feet, but I was really close to that animal, so it was hard to get its antlers in and give a little space above the antlers and get more of the feet. And I think to me, the composition is a little awkward. It's too much in the center. And this is uncropped, by the way, too much in the center. I wish it was kind of shifted over to the right a little bit more, but I love the scene. I love the soft lighting, love the snow, and love everything about it. And then even some more kind of wintertime Christmas pictures. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, happy first day of winter. It's the winter solstice. So here in Texas, I think it was 9:36 a.m. was the official peak of the winter solstice. And so we are now on the march to longer or more sunlight hours in the day, and slowly on the march to the summer solstice, which will happen 6 months from now, where the days will start getting shorter once again. So first day of winter here in North Texas looks like we had a pretty hard freeze this morning, probably 25 degrees this morning. And then I think today it's supposed to get up to 60. So, but it's supposed to be a lot warmer this weekend. We're having unseasonably warm temperatures. But there's a few more Christmas themed pictures. The picture on the left with the pines and the light shining through it, that was actually taken on a BCJ trip in Yellowstone as well. And the thing I like about that picture is really everything. I think that it's got a lot of drama to it with the steam and with the light and the backlit way it looks. Really for me, I think it's pretty close the way it is. I don't know that I would change it much at all. But here's a good photo lesson for you. Whenever you're taking, let me back up a second. Whenever you're taking pictures of animals on the snow like this, you've always got to compensate somehow. One of the things that you can do is shoot manually. I usually don't shoot manually. My preferred mode of shooting almost all my pictures. In fact, I did a deep dive on analytics of my pictures on a past webinar, and I showed the people that were listening that 80% of the pictures that I take are taken on aperture priority mode. And I like aperture priority for one reason. I'm not a fan of auto ISO. So typically I'll set my ISO to a static number, usually between 400 and 800. It's kind of my sweet spot. And then aperture priority, because I like to set the aperture. I like the wide open aperture, so you get the out of focus backgrounds like you have here. And then I let the camera decide on the shutter speed. And the reason why I do that is it just speeds me up a little bit in the field where I don't have to think about all three settings. So I set the ISO, I set the aperture I want it, and let the camera decide on the shutter speed. Now, with snow, my point is with snow, one of the things that you've got to do typically is snow will really fool the meter in the camera. And so with snow, you have to overexpose the image by usually about a stop to be able to get that white snow. We've all done it before. I've done it a million times where you take pictures of the snow and the snow just looks gray in the background. Well, to be able to get the white snow, you have to fool the camera into thinking that, or you have to tell the camera to overexpose it a little bit. If you use exposure compensation, which I would recommend because that works really quick, to overexpose means you got to add light to it. And so that's plus on the exposure compensation side. So I would just dial a +1 in exposure compensation on this. With Canon, you can roll a dial on the back, the big knob on the back. You can just roll it back or forth. With Nikon, I know they've got a button by the shutter button that you push, and then you can adjust it from there. And I think it's the same way with Sony as well, but this is a +1 on the exposure compensation. And I mention that because with something with the dark background to it, you got to go the opposite way. You got to minus exposure compensation, because if I let the camera decide on this picture of the pines, it would try to expose for the pines and bring out detail in it, and that would make the overall picture too bright. And so because it would make it too bright, I've got to take light away or minus light from it. So I've got to do a minus exposure compensation. So usually if it's a dark background, minus exposure compensation. If it's a bright background like snow, plus exposure compensation. And if you can just keep that in your mind and remember that little trick every time, it'll speed you up immensely in the field. Because one of the things that I've learned over time, especially with wildlife photography, with nature photography, with landscape photography, you got a little time to think about it. In this particular case on the pines on the left, I had a little bit of time to think about how I needed to set it. But with wildlife that may be there a second and don't, you got to really develop that, or it may be there for a second and then move on. You've got to really develop that muscle memory to understand the scene you're looking at and understand whether or not you need exposure compensation or not. I had a question just come in. Stephen asked, any concerns about our trip to South Africa for June of 2022? Stephen, ultimately, I think there's always a bit of concern with the travel restrictions because of COVID-19, but as far as the details of that, I'm not really in the loop on that yet, because we've got more trips coming up in the immediate time. And so I would recommend that you stay in contact with the folks at BCJ, like Kelly or anybody else that's handling the customer service end. They're kind of on a day-to-day status update. They'll be able to tell you a lot more about what's going on in that. So as far as I'm concerned, I haven't heard any different as far as I know, and nothing's changed on this end. We're still going to be in South Africa in June of 2020, and we're going to remain optimistic that trip will remain open. So that's a good question. Thanks for that question. And again, if anybody else has any questions or comments about the pictures I'm showing or about the information I'm giving you, let me know. And warning too, to just reiterate, this is going to be kind of a free-flowing day today. So I'm going to cover not just photography, the pictures, and break them down for you, but I'm also going to cover some free flow topics like my early Christmas presents and my thoughts. Here's a good example here of why you've got to be able to work quick when you're shooting pictures of wildlife. And that's why, again, I use the aperture priority mode, because it's one less thing I've got to mess with. So my camera is essentially always ready for me to look through. So my thoughts on this picture here, this is of a pine marten. We were going through the snow. I knew we were liable to see wildlife. So I knew if I kept my camera set on aperture priority, and if I knew I had the ISO set at 800, and if I knew I had my aperture set at 5.6, and then I knew that because it was in the snow, I had to set the, did I mention that already? I knew I had to set the exposure compensation to +1 to overexpose the image to make the white go white. If we saw anything, the camera wasn't going to mess up because the camera was preset. The only thing that was going to mess up potentially was me, because of me not being ready. And we stopped at a bathroom on a BCJ trip, and the guy driving the snow coach for us says, "Hey, look, there's a pine marten." And we were all out of the vehicle and we had our cameras, and all of a sudden that pine marten was hopping around some trees, and I was able to get 2 pictures like this, and before he disappeared. And that little bit of I had to crop this to fit the slide a little bit, but that little bit of blur you see is a tree that he's setting beside. But if I was having to start from scratch with my camera and not anticipate what you see here, it happened so fast I never would have got this picture. And incredible little animals, just love them, beautiful. So I want to talk about a few early Christmas presents I got. Now, if you've been on a trip with me before, if you've listened to webinars, you know that I shoot Canon cameras, and I shoot Canon cameras because that's what I shoot. In my opinion, they're no better than Nikon cameras. They're no better than Olympus cameras. They're no better than Sony cameras. They're a good quality camera is a good quality camera. And believe me, I've used all camera brands. And so I'm not an advocate of Canon. It goes back to a long time ago when I switched from Minolta. I used to shoot those to switch into Canon. And so it's just what I use. But last September, when I knew it was time to switch, I almost switched to Sony. And the reason why is Sony's doing some pretty impressive things with their camera. if I was ever going to switch, I was needing to make the transition to mirrorless, or I was going to switch completely different systems. But I ended up staying with Canon, and so about a month ago, I got myself some early Christmas presents. And the first thing I got, and I'll show you this as we go along, I got the Canon R5 with the battery grip. One of the things that I always do when I buy cameras is I buy these battery grips for them. Now, it does add a little bit of weight to it. It does add a little bit of weight to it, but to me, that is okay for a couple of reasons. It's justified for a couple of reasons. Number one, these battery grips will hold 2 batteries. You know, one of the things I kept hearing from guests about their biggest complaint on mirrorless cameras is how fast it goes through the batteries. But with this, this will hold 2 batteries. And I noticed last week when we were on our backcountry journeys tour in the Everglades that I literally shot half the week without having to charge batteries. And so this will just extend the battery life and really make it last a long time. And this is kind of, I'm going to show you that again. This is kind of wading the weed stuff to me. But for me, one of the things that I love doing, and I would encourage everyone to add this to their photographic repertoire of 2022, is a lot of people like shooting horizontal pictures, but you need to think about vertical sometime. And the great thing about these grips is all of your controls, you got a shutter button there, and then you've got you can reach these controls here by the lens if you've got custom function set. But then on the back, I've still got, let me see that. I've still got all of my dials and my buttons and everything else. So I've got full functional control of the camera when I'm holding it like that, as opposed to when I'm gripping it on top with just if I didn't have this battery control grip. And the reason why I like that, because from a proper photographic technique, you know, the best thing to do is use a tripod. But if you can't use a tripod, like I wasn't using a tripod in this Pine Marten image, the best photographic technique when you're holding a big lens is make sure you keep your elbows in. Well, if you're shooting like this, you can't keep your elbow in. It makes it a little bit harder. But if you're shooting like that, you can keep both elbows in, which provides a lot more stability. And then the fourth thing I like about them really is that they're I said fourth thing. I think I meant third thing. First thing is extra batteries. Second thing is ergonomics. Third thing is ergonomics too, because it allows you to, I can grip the camera with my whole hand instead of just like the upper half or upper third of my right hand. I can grip it with my whole hand, and it just helps me hold it steady. And the fourth thing, honestly, one of my early Christmas presents I got back in the day that my parents bought me when I first started. I've been taking pictures forever. I started taking pictures when I was 16. Got my first really good camera when I was about 19. And I remember my parents bought me one time for like $150 for Christmas was a motor drive for my Minolta camera, because that's the thing in my mind that made me look like a pro, was having that extra. So really, I should say that's really first reason I buy these things, because it looks really cool. It makes me feel like I'm more of a pro, but it's just the ergonomics of it all. But that first motor drive I had was for a film camera, and I could shoot a blazing 3.5 frames per second. And when I got that thing, I thought, I never need to go any faster than this at all. This is all you need to do. And it was amazing. Had a question come in. I'll answer. Noel asked, for the Pine Marten shot, were you spot focus? Were you on spot focus or just the eye? One of the things that I do on my cameras, and it's different now with the eye focus on the mirrorless cameras, but on my 1DX cameras that I use for wildlife photography a lot, and I love those cameras because they're built like a tank, is I've gotten where I can quickly move the eye focus around really fast. And so that's what I did. And I've got some presets set that'll go to certain quadrants of my image. So I used just a spot focus, bumped it over to the eye and focused on the eye and took the pictures is what I did. So it wasn't on an area wide focus. It wasn't on where it uses all the focusing points. I just have that camera set where I think you can adjust to any one of, I don't know, let's say 40 focusing points, but I've got it narrowed down to like 6 where I know the most common places are going to be, and I can bump over to those spots really quick. And that's what I do with this image. And I hope that answers your questions. Another thing I got, this just came in yesterday. I bought a GoPro 10. Oops, excuse me. And for anybody that'll care to listen, this may be the most versatile camera that you can buy. I mean, you've seen all the action shots of guys skiing or guys on motorcycles and doing all kinds of crazy stuff like they market these things with. But from a wildlife photography standpoint, this is a pretty practical little camera. And I've actually had images published in a magazine on numerous occasions with pictures I shot from this. And so I got the latest iteration yesterday of the GoPro 10 and haven't really taken it out into the wild yet, but just as far as the specs are concerned, it's got about I think it shoots 12 megapixel stills, which are plenty big. I mean, the sensor's a little bit smaller, but it's not as big as these full frame DSLRs. But the image quality these things will create is amazing. But another thing it can really do that you may not have thought about is it'll shoot, this will shoot 5K video. And if you've got some really good video that you can actually go in and take a still frame out of and use that as a picture. I've done that before too. In one of the particular times that I've done it is the thing I like about these is you can put them, if you've got a, let me dig in my bag of tricks. If you've got a tripod mount, you can actually put one of these on a tripod mount, mount them to the tripod. And then I use that tripod or a monopod as like a big long stick. And if you've got clear water with fish swimming around, you can put these things down in the water and do underwater photography without having to get wet. And I love that about them. One of the key features on this GoPro 10 that I wanted to buy too, that I'm going to try out. We've been cloudy all week, so I haven't got to try it yet. But living out in the country, I've got a really great view from my front door of the northern sky. And I don't want to stay up all night, but it's got a feature in there where you can actually set it to turn on at a certain time. So essentially what I can do is put it out in the field, set it to turn on at like 12 midnight, do a time lapse of the stars going in circles, and then I can program it when to shut itself off. So I can just essentially do a nighttime star trails into daytime sunrise and then be done. And I'm pretty excited about that feature. That's one of the features I don't understand why the DSLR cameras can't be upgraded with to be able to have that. But there's a number of features that DSLRs don't have that I wonder why they don't have. Like, should I really have to go change my settings for daylight savings time? You ought to be able to default to be able to opt out of that, because it ought to change it, because I always forget. And then I look at my pictures, because I use in Lightroom, a lot of times I use the metadata to sort my pictures and try to figure out where they're at and catalog them and database them. And I find more often than not, the mistake I make is I forget to change the time on my cameras, and all that data doesn't line up right. And it gets a little bit frustrating over time, having to go back and change all that when they should make it where the cameras can just automatically do that. So here's a new lens I just picked up, and I haven't even used this thing yet, but I learned about it, and there it is right there. I've got this mounted on a Canon 90. Yeah, I've got on my 90D. So let me get right there. So this is I don't even know how to pronounce it, Laowa or Loa or something like that. It's a 15 millimeter macro. And I learned about this lens last summer, not by the lens, but by a technique, because I was judging this photography contest in South Texas. It's called Wildlife in Focus, and it's a cool concept for a nature photography contest. Essentially, what they do is they encourage private land conservation. So they team up a wildlife photographer with the landowner. Both have to pay the entry fee to the contest, but if whoever wins, they start splitting the proceeds between they split the proceeds between the landowner and the photographer. And so when I was judging this, I noticed a guy was shooting these really cool macro shots of these bees and like dung beetles and stuff like that, where you could see the background behind them. It wasn't just focused on that. So I started, after I saw those pictures and were enamored with them, I started looking back and trying to figure out what lens he might have shot that with. They stripped the metadata out of the pictures, so I couldn't do that. But I found there's a Chinese company making these really high quality lenses that are wide angle macro. I played with it in the house, and you can actually focus right up until about 1/4 of an inch from the lens, and it's 15 millimeters, so you can focus that close and see everything behind it. Now the downside, it's got a little bit of shift, so you can do like a tilt shift lens. The downside of it is it's manual focus, but that doesn't bother me really that much. Actually, I like it better, because a lot of times when I shoot macro photography, I turn the autofocus off anyway. But I'm excited about, as the bugs start coming out and it gets warmer, about using this lens. Francis asked the question, I notice pro photographers rarely mention Panasonic Lumix camera. Why do you think that is? I can't answer for other photographers, Francis. I can answer for myself, and I think it is because I'm just not familiar with that camera, and I probably should be. I think as I think back about our backcountry journeys tour, I see a lot of Canon, a lot of Nikon, a lot of Olympus, and a lot of Sony, but I can't remember anyone using a Panasonic. And so my guess is the technology has been democratized. That's why I said earlier, one camera system isn't necessarily better than the other camera system. And I'll talk about that here in a little bit, what my thoughts are on that, on getting mired down in just brand names. And so that's why I don't mention it, because I just haven't used it. So here's my this is my one of my 2022 list. I hope you go on a trip with me somewhere, Francis, and I can see your camera and try it out. So that way I will start talking about it, because I'm sure it's a fine camera. I just don't know anything about it, is all. And so back to the early Christmas, here's another thing I bought. And this is kind of an atypical purchase for me. Canon came out with a new lens for the mirrorless camera. It's 800 millimeter, but it's f11. And at first I thought, why do I need an f11 lens? Because that kind of goes completely against my brand and my style of photography, because you've heard me mention, if you listen to these before a million times, that I like the really soft out of focus backgrounds and really creamy backgrounds. And can you achieve that with f11? Because I'm usually shooting at f4, f5.6. Can you achieve that with f11? And here is how my simpleton male logic panned out. If I'm shooting, and I got it specifically before we did the Bosque del Apache tour, because that's a lot of birds in flight. And so my thought was, can I get 800 millimeters? And with that, so these R5s, one thing I learned about it is they're a full frame sensor, but you can push a button and I can make it like a crop sensor, like a 1.6 crop. So I don't know what the math, 1280, I think it is, 800 times 1.6, 1280 millimeter. So I can have a 1280 millimeter lens that I can hand hold. It's still at f11, but in my mind, f11 really didn't matter when I'm shooting pictures of birds on a blue sky, because a blue sky out of focus is going to look essentially the same as a blue sky in focus. And so I went ahead and bought it. I thought $900, can't lose. It's going to be $900. I can't lose. I'm willing to at least try it out for that. And if I don't like it, I can sell it again. But I got that lens and used it on the Bosque del Apache, the New Mexico trip. I used it, just got back last week from the Florida Everglades trip, and for the use I bought it for, shooting pictures of birds in flight, primarily over blue skies, it works like a charm. It focuses fast. It's super sharp. It's portable. I'm not having to get out the big 500 f4 and use a tripod with it, and so it works really, really, really great. Now, it does have some limitations. If you can get some really soft out of focus backgrounds at f11, but you really got to pay attention to the background and the angle of the bird to the background and all kinds of other stuff. It's not just automatic like it is with other lenses. But I can tell you, is it going to replace my 500 millimeter f4 lens? Absolutely not. Is it a good complement? And that's the way I look at it. It's like the low of 15 millimeter. I'm not going to go out and replace my Canon 16 to 35 millimeter with this 15 millimeter macro. It's just another tool in my toolbox. And it just so happens that 800 millimeter lens was $900. So I was really happy about that. And Francis says, oh, I got my Christmas wish already. Francis is going to Alaska in September with us, and she's going to bring the Lumix G9. So Francis, you just need to make sure that I can use that camera when I get there, so that way I can talk more intelligently about it in the future. And so I thought, I was kind of looking around this morning and thinking about, oh, by the way, I'm sorry. I got sidetracked. So I got to looking around this morning, and I was really just kind of thinking about what's coming up in 2022 from photography news standpoint. And I'm usually not a really a hardcore gear guy. I mean, I like the gear, but I also think about gear like if I'm a carpenter, as long as my hammer works and I know how to use my hammer, that's really all I need to know. But I've been paying a little bit more attention to the photo news, and that's what I'm gonna share with you here. By the way, this coyote here is the things the thing I don't like about it is, as always, I wish I'd have been a little closer. This was actually on my property where I photographed this coyote. The things I love about it is it's always cool when you're sitting on the ground and you're at eye level with the coyote like this is, because the thing I love about this picture is the out of focus in the foreground as well as the out of focus in the background. I just think it adds a dimension to pictures that you just can't get when you're standing up, and that's a photo tip too. I really try to encourage everybody to do. And a lot of the guests remind me it's pretty easy to get down, but it's a little bit harder to get up. And that I always tell them that's why I'm there to help them and try to get back on their feet if they need it. But I always encourage it. Good rule of thumb and a basic rule of thumb with wildlife photography, especially, is just try to get the eye level of the animal you're shooting. I mentioned GoPro earlier. Like we were in Florida last week and we were seeing some alligator gars down in the water, and you can shoot pictures of them because the water is super clear, but the pictures always look better if you can drop that camera below the water and get eye level with them. And that's what makes those GoPros so handy. And so it's that's what I love about this picture, is the fact that I'm at eye level with it, and it sees me and I see it, and we make that brief connection, and I get some pictures. I didn't include the picture of this, but I've got a picture a couple of frames later of what she thought about me, because she walked to the left and squatted and went to the bathroom right in front of me while she was staring at me. So she didn't think very highly of me being in her territory, but a beautiful picture nonetheless. Upcoming in 2022, and some of this is a little bit old news, but I think it's noteworthy anyway. The new Nikon Z9 is coming out. That camera looks to be pretty impressive. I mean, the crazy thing is about these cameras is none of them are cheap. And I don't want to sound like an elitist and only talk about the most expensive cameras there are, because, I run a business, and one of the elemental things that I understand about business is you can't always control how much money you make, but you can always control how much you spend. And that's why I would notoriously tell people on these trips we would do that I've got pretty, for the most part, until I bought this new gear a month ago, my newest camera was like 6 years old. I mean, I just don't upgrade gear that often. And so I'd always try to watch how much I spent, because it affects your bottom line when you're a small business owner like I am. But anyway, the new Nikon Z9 is coming out, and that camera is pretty it'll do 120 frames a second in JPEG. And that's just amazing. That 120 frames a second, if you don't know, is if you watch slow motion footage on any kind of TV show, whether it's nature or usually nature shows where you see a lot of, but that really slow, smooth, slow motion footage, that's 120 frames a second. So that's a video frame rate they're shooting with that Z9, but it's shooting all still pictures, and that's just amazing. I also read this morning, and this news announced this week, that Canon's coming out with a version of the R5, and it's called the R5C. And what the C means is it's a designation that Canon puts on their cameras that are more designed for cinema use. And so these R5s, they'll shoot 8K video, and it's so they came out with the camera. It has a few more video settings, but I didn't mention this in this one. But if you're really into Canon R3, the R3s have been announced, and they've been coming out. They're coming out. They're on back order. Some people are saying because of the supply chain issue, that's maybe 6 months to a year before people get them. I actually got to use one out in the wild when I was at Bosque del Apache. I didn't know the guy. He knew me. I don't know how, but we started talking for a while, and he said, "Here, I got the new Canon R3. Do you want to use it?" And that's an absolutely true story. And so I stood there and used it for about 15 minutes, and that's a wonderful camera as well. It's just amazing all the technology they're able to pack in these cameras these days. But rumor has it is Canon's also coming out with an R1, which is it's the equivalent to like the 1D series cameras. That's going to be a little bit more robust. And I can tell you, just being familiar with Canon, that's a pretty typical rollout. Back when Canon started going to the EOS brand cameras, autofocus, they came out with the EOS 5, and then the EOS 3 was kind of a hybrid between It wasn't a full pro spec camera, but it was kind of pro spec, prosumer. And then they came out with the EOS 1, which was their fully pro cameras. And they're doing the same thing with the mirrorless now. They came out with the 5. Also rumored a Canon 7 mirrorless camera that is going to be, and this is a rumor, is going to be about an $800 full frame mirrorless camera. And that sounds pretty exciting as well. And Francis, I'm sorry I left out Panasonic, but Sony, Olympus, and Canon all have new lenses coming. It looks like Sony and Olympus are coming out with some really good looking, Sony's coming out with the new 85-1.2 lens. They've got the 85-1.4 now, but I've shot an 85-1.2 lens a lot, especially for a lot of magazine photography I do. And just the difference between 1.4, f1.4 and f1.2 is magical. I mean, it just makes all the difference in the world. Olympus has like an 8 to 15 millimeter lens coming out for their stuff, and that looks to be pretty amazing. Well, and Canon all has new lenses coming out. I also read too that Nikon has a 800 millimeter f6.3 lens that's coming out as well, and so that's pretty exciting to hear about that as well. And so it's the good old days in photography right now. I don't know of any other way to put it, but it just is, because all of this technology, again, whether you're using Panasonic, Canon, Nikon, Olympus, if Kevin Mcallister of Home Alone, who's listening in now, comes out with the camera brand, it's going to be a good one, because the technology allows people to, the technology allows people to do so many cool things with photography these days. I'm going to take a sip of coffee real quick, because I've been overusing my voice for the past week, talking to my teacher voice, and so it's a little strained. I've dreamed about this picture for a long time. Dreamed about getting a picture of a fox or coyote, some kind of predator, on just a bank of snow. And this isn't crop. This isn't any kind of photo tricks. This is what I said earlier, that understanding that if you take this picture with your camera and you let the camera decide, the camera is going to make this snow look gray. And so understanding how the camera was going to behave, I pre-dialed the +1 exposure compensation, or if you shoot manual, just overexpose one stop. And then so when that fox came out on the Winter in Yellowstone tour, I was ready for it. And that fox hung out in front of us for a while, and I shot that picture. And so I like this picture because I think it's well composed. I love the scene. The thing I did notice until I was looking later, and I didn't do anything about it, I could easily, but it's got a little bit of grass right here. And I can't, part of me, when I look at that grass in the lower right, I look at it and I try to think about, do I like it or not? I can't decide if I like it or not, but I just left it so you could see what the original picture looked like. And again, that picture, it was shot in RAW, but that picture right there is within, it's 98% of the way it looked on the camera, because it looks, when you overexpose like that, your camera is going to be screaming at you that, hey, this isn't right. You got to change this. But that's where you go back to the fundamentals, and you understand the fundamentals of photography, and you understand that even though cameras have gotten really, really good, they're still fallible. They're not infallible. They still make mistakes, and they still can't calculate everything. The most important tool any of us have when you're taking pictures is that right there. Is just the ability to outthink the camera and understand when the camera is going to get it right, and more importantly, understand when the camera, from an exposure standpoint, is just going to get it wrong. And the cameras, they're getting better at it, but they still get it wrong when you have a really bright background or you have a really dark background. And I reiterate that again, because that's especially in wildlife photography, that's such an important concept to remember. If the background is dominated by something bright, like white, like the snow, you've got to plus or add in exposure composition. If it's something that's really dark, like shadowy, you've got to go the other way. You've got to take light away, because the camera is going to try to make the scene too bright if the background's dark. So you have to minus exposure compensation. Background too bright plus, background too dark minus. And I mentioned earlier, I did the analytics on all 620,000 images, keeper images that are in my database, and was able to figure out, this is a good lesson I learned when I did the statistical analysis of all those pictures, is that 80% of the time in nature photography, you never have to go more than +1 or -1 on the exposure compensation. So that's helpful to people that are trying to learn that, because you're not having to think, well, do I go -2, -3? Where do I start? I've got all these different possibilities on exposure compensation to dial in, which is the right one. And I can tell you empirically from the evidence I've seen on the pictures I've taken, 80% of them are either -1 or they're +1. They don't go beyond the bounds of that plus or -1 exposure compensation. And so you just got to decide, if it's a bright background, you got a plus. If it's a dark background, you got a minus. And that's when I figured that out as a photographer, maybe 12 years ago. That little rule in my head, remembering that, has made all the difference on, number one, how much work I've got to do on images afterwards, but number two, how much confidence it gives me knowing I'm going to get the image right. David says, Pat says, beautiful. Thank you for that, Pat. David says, I try to expose to the right as much as I can. If a snow scene I expose to the right, would you still need to use exposure compensation, or would the picture still be overexposed? If I understand the question correctly, David, if you're already exposing to the right, you won't need exposure compensation because you're already dialing that in manually, if I understand that correctly. If I understand your question wrong, just feel free to clarify. And so here's some things I learned in 2021. By the way, that's the same fox there. I'll talk about this picture. So let me go back. So you get, dang it, I always forget it does this. I get too excited to tell a story and I forget I've got those bullet points that slows me down. So you get one scene, and this is how fast things change in Yellowstone in the wintertime. So we're socked in, it's snowing, or it had been snowing, and it's cloudy, overcast, and we've got this snow kind of traipsing around. I mean, we got this fox kind of traipsing around in the snow, and we're shooting pictures of it. Well, the fox goes over this knoll and disappears, and we think it's gone. Well, then all of a sudden, the clouds go away. I mean, within I don't want to say minutes, because I don't want it to sound like I'm talking about 30 minutes. I mean, like within a minute, the clouds disappear or they start going away, and all of a sudden we got blue skies. And so we start focusing on taking pictures of these beautiful snow banks and blue skies. And then out of nowhere, the wind changes a little bit and it starts blowing snow up into the air. And it was at the right angle of the sun. It made it look like we were in a snow globe. It was crazy. And then, as serendipity would have it, I don't think it's serendipity. I don't think things that happen by accident. I think we're all part of this big grand plan. But as serendipity would have it, all of a sudden we look up and that same fox had circled back and came to the top of that mound. And we were able to get pictures like this right here of just like, it's a fox in a snow globe. And I love that picture. He was a little far away from us, but that was okay because you're able to get this nice environmental shot. But we took all kinds of pictures of that fox in the snow like that. And so the things I learned in 2021, these are some big breakthroughs. And so this is kind of your teaser to some things that are coming up in some webinars later on. So if I don't really explain how to do some of these things, I'll be explaining those later on. The Photoshop panorama mode, you typically think of panoramas as a series of landscape images that you stitch together to make a panorama. But I was playing with some birds in flight images, and if you've ever shot birds in flights before, birds in flight before, it's a hit or miss proposition. Some you'll get right, a lot you won't get right, and more often than not, what I do is I either track too far or track not enough and chop the birds off. And so here's an example right here of these are. You can see by the file number that's unchanged. We've got 9, the last 3 digits of the number. We've got 908, and then we got 910. So there's a wing flap difference between these pictures when I took them. There's only one file number between them. So what I did is I thought, and this is a few months back, I wonder if you can stitch landscape images together, why can't you stitch wildlife images together? So in other words, if the picture on the left, the eye was a little bit out of focus, and the picture on the right, the eye was in focus, I wonder if I could use the panoramic mode to stitch both of those together, and come to find out you can. It'll do it. And so I learned that if you stitch those 2 images together, it'll kind of give you, and you can see the overlaps of the 2 pictures. You can do it manually, but it did it automatically for me. And I was so pumped about that. Now, Granted, I may be the last one to figure this out, but I don't feel like I'm the first one, but it's new to me, so I'm pretty excited about it. But what you're able to do from there is you're able to take an image that before, might have had everything right about it as far as in focus and everything else, but you from user error, you chop the wings off, but you can find a similar image and add the wings back to it. And so from there, I could recrop this image and make an image that's really, really useful in the end. And so the panoramic mode, using it for wildlife photography, is one of the things that was a kind of a big breakthrough for me in 2021. And so I mentioned that. It's a beautiful wolf in the snow, by the way. Here's another. So one of the things, I don't know if you're with me or not, but a couple weeks ago when I attempted to do a webinar, I think there were some issues with the webinar platform that day. Luckily, knock on wood, we haven't had any issues today. But with the webinar platform, I was going to show you about this part, but we've rescheduled that webinar for later or in January, I believe. So stay tuned for that. But I found a keyword plugin for Lightroom called My Keyworder, and it saves me a ton of time in the past, because one of the things on managing your digital photo collection is I'm an advocate of is taking the time and of just putting some light keywords in your images so you can find them later on. And there's some AI services that'll kind of do that for you, but it hasn't gotten to the point where it's really, really good yet, where the AI can identify what's in your pictures through Lightroom. So what My Keyworder Plus allows me to do, in the past, I might sit there and think about this picture and think of like, okay, there's wolf and there's snow, and so what other kind of keywords can I think of to help me find it? Or more importantly, I don't want to sound like a plug on this, but the core of my business is I'm a business to business enterprise. So I license photography to other places that use photography, like book publishers or magazines or commercial clients or whatever. And so I'm always trying to think of ways that they're going to be looking for pictures too. So what My Keyworder does for Lightroom is, instead of me sit there having to think of all these keyword images and all these different variations and synonyms for words, I just type in my basic keywords to like snow or wolf into this plugin, and it'll give me all the synonyms. So then all I have to do is select those keywords I want to use, and then it'll paste them onto those images in batch. And instead of me having to sit there and manually type, which I never took typing in school, so I pretty much still type with these two fingers. And even though I've had millions of words, and literally that's a literal number, I've had a million words published in magazines and books that I've written, I still type kind of an old school way, because that's just the way I taught myself to type. And I'm not the fastest typist in the world. And so that My Keyworder for Lightroom saves a lot of time, and it just makes me much, much more efficient on the arduous task. And I say that arduous with emphasis on the arduous task of having to go through and manage your images and keep up with where they're all at. And here's what I was kind of talking about earlier. I alluded to this is I didn't learn this in 2021. I've known this all along, but I'm going to double down on it right now for everyone to hear. Technology is great, but it still can't outpace a fundamental understanding of photography. The cameras are getting better and better and better. When I say we live on the good old days of photography, I absolutely mean it. And tomorrow will be better than today, because something new will come out, some new accessory or some new feature in a camera will be upgraded, and it's all great, but that still can't outpace a fundamental understanding of photography. I look at it like this, and you can pick any discipline and be the same way. I love watching cooking shows, and I like Bobby Flay. And Bobby Flay's a good cook, not because he's got good pans and good knives, but that's not why he's a good cook. He's a good cook because he understands the fundamentals of cooking, and that's why he can make great dishes. Photography's no different. It's the technology's good, but you still got to keep fundamentals in mind, like using a tripod when you can, or if you can't, keep your elbows tucked in and holding cameras properly, and paying attention and understanding what things like ISO and aperture and shutter speed, and how all those things interact with one another, and how that like in the natural world, like Sir Isaac Newton taught us, in the photography world, it's a lot the same way, that for every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. You change aperture, it's going to affect your shutter speed. You change ISO, it's going to affect your shutter speed. And all of those things, I equate a lot of times to photography and understanding exposure. It's like putting water in a bucket. If a full bucket is a proper exposure, and you can manipulate how fast the water pours out of the bucket, with the faucet, like the aperture, and then how fast the water pours out is like the rate of flow going into the bucket. You can still fill the bucket up. There's all kinds of different combinations you can use to fill the bucket up, but it's important you know how to fill that bucket up and how to get it proper exposure and all the things that it takes. And that's why I was talking so much about exposure compensation earlier. And so some things I hope to accomplish in 2022. This is some hoarfrost on a biothermal feature in Yellowstone. One of the things I talk about a lot to people is it's easy to see the big things. And I've even played this game a few times in our orientation meeting on some of the backcountry journeys tours, but there's a game I play sometimes that get people to understand the essence of photography. And it's really seeing beyond what's obvious. It's obvious that you see a wolf, but beside the wolf, are you missing something that's just as beautiful, like this hoarfrost on a unknown species of grass that looks like a rescue grass species, but I'm not sure exactly what it is. But are you missing something like that? And so those are the things that you got to be on the lookout for. And again, having a good understanding of the fundamentals of photography to know how to capture a scene like that is always essential. So one of the things I hope to do in 2022 is I am a trained teacher. My degree is in agriculture education. If you don't know, a lot of people do know, but if you don't know, I spent 16 years as a teacher teaching agricultural science at Childress High School in Childress, Texas. And so I've always loved to teach and always loved the science of teaching. And there is a way to make teaching more efficient. And so one of the things I hope to accomplish in 2022 is make teaching more efficient, because here's the big secret. For lack of a better term, I'm going to call it the photography educational industrial complex. So the photography educational industrial complex understands that there's no money in simplicity. And I think the opposite of that. I think about photography, there's a lot of simplicity to it. And you ought to be teaching simplicity, and you ought to figure out a way to make it more efficient, because the faster you can teach someone to take successful pictures with their camera, the happier they're going to be with the medium and the less frustrated they're going to be. Now, I don't always accomplish it, but I try to make the teaching efficient to the point where you can get from point A to point B as fast as you can, where people have a deep understanding of what they're doing and they can make their camera work for them instead of them working for their camera. But again, there's a lot of places you go on YouTube, and I do it all the time when I'm trying to learn something new. You go on YouTube and there's people who make it needlessly complicated. And it doesn't have to be that complicated. I mean, these cameras are complicated machines, but our interface with them does not have to be complicated, because it all goes back to that lesson I said before. If you understand the fundamentals of photography, the rest of the stuff comes easy. But you got to have a fundamental understanding of how it all works. And it's not like we're building rockets either. It's if we were trying to be like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos and send people to outer space, I might not say that, but we're using the device to capture beautiful scenes all around us, and there's got to be a more efficient way than the way we've been teaching it. So I'm working on ways to make things more efficient, because I love efficiency. And then another thing I'm going to do personally, if you follow along, I talk about Hackberry Farm a lot, because it's a farm that I bought. It's been in my family since the probably early 60s. I'm the latest owner for the past 60 years. A continuous member of my family has owned it. I'm the latest one to own it. It's been a hay farm, but I am putting my money where my mouth is when it comes to conservation. I love wildlife. I love wildlife conservation. I don't want to be the reason why there's not a place for songbirds to eat. I don't want to be a reason why that my property gets overdeveloped to the point that wildlife can't thrive. And so this is a plug. I've got a side project called Wildlife Photo Show where I do behind the scenes videos. And I've got a video on there. You may have seen it. You may not have seen it, called The Land Plan. And it's a video I made about my plans for this piece of property I bought and all the things I'm going to do to it. So I'm well on my way. We're about to install wood duck boxes soon. We've been planning food plots all summer long. And then when the summer food plots died, we shredded them down so there'd be seed on the ground for the birds. And then we planted winter food plots for the deer and the bigger animals to get them through the winter. So lots of food on the property. We're making more efficient ways to move the water around, where we can store water in a pond, and the pond's going to be wildlife habitat all of its own for wading birds and pond birds like red-winged blackbirds, as well as the fish and turtles that live in that pond, because the pond is like 10 feet deep. But we're building ways to move water from the pond down to the wetlands, because like this year on the wetlands that are on my property, that has a water control structure, by the way, that we can flood it when we want to and we can drain it when we want to. I can move water from the pond that'll serve as water storage as my reservoir. I can move it down to the wetland, because like this year we've had a dry fall and the wetland is dry right now. And so it's not being any migratory birds. It's not being of any benefit to. So I'm going to continue to put my money where my mouth is when it comes to conservation. I think that's important. I try to be as good a naturalist as I am a photographer and understand all the things I'm taking pictures of. And it helps me connect with the land and connect with that when I can, instead of being a hay farmer, I'm a wildlife farmer now, because all the crops and things I grow now all go to benefit the wildlife. And discover new ways to take pictures using all available technology. And that's one of the things that I love doing too, is taking cameras or taking Photoshop, like in the case of stitching the stuff together, like I talked about earlier, figuring out new ways to use it that people really haven't thought about before. And so like I'm thinking right now, how can I use that new GoPro I bought and put it in places that, I haven't thought before. One of the things I love doing is camera trapping and setting out camera traps so that I can take pictures of wildlife at night. I'm actually working on a magazine story right now called The Night Shift, and it's about animals and critters that move around at night. And so I've got camera traps set out, shooting pictures of animals as they move around at night in their natural habitat. And so I like trying to do that and figure out new ways to use the technology. And one of the ways I hope to do that is through software like Photoshop, like I talked about, but also just like little guys like this, and just trying to figure out how we can use them to take pictures that are compelling and dynamic and help tell the story about wildlife conservation. This is a picture of a wolf I took near Yellowstone. Full disclosure, this wolf was in an enclosure. It was at a wolf rescue sanctuary, but they let me come by and take pictures. And using good fundamentals and understanding how the background is going to look and using the right angle, I could shoot that picture without seeing. There was a fence pretty far in the background, but you can still see the fence in the background. But I wanted to shoot a slow pan shot of this wolf walking by. And so the way to accomplish that is the best is use a tripod. Because with trying to shoot a pan on the tripod, because if you notice, the eye is perfectly in focus. And I overexposed by a stop on this one too to get the white snow. But when you put a camera on a tripod, you're panning left to right. So oh gosh, I went blank on my math. So the y-axis, I think it is. So you've got some stability in the y-axis, but you've got a little less stability in the x-axis. I mean, a little in the x-axis as well as the z-axis. So you're not moving closer, even subtly. You're not moving closer or further away from the animal. You're not moving up and down as much. You're just panning left to right, which would be I think that's the x. I don't know, whatever axis that is. I'm panning left to right. So tripods give me some stability, and I've tried to handhold slow shutter speed pans like this before, but the truth is, I never can get the eye in focus. But using a tripod, I typically can get the eye in focus. And then this is a picture from last. This is a picture from last winter when we had snow here in Texas of a sparrow feeding on a plant. And then classic Yellowstone winter picture where you've got the hoarfrost and the steam from the thermal features in the background, as well as you've got the steam in the background. And I like this shot because you've got a strong anchor in the foreground of all this frozen grass, and then the dead pines in the background. And that's the same area right there. It's just a little bit more moody scene. That's a landscape shot with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. So again, that's what I mean. I mean, I try to use the lenses and the cameras I've got in ways that typically you don't think about them using, but scenes like this make look good in wide angle. And then again, there's the fox That's when the fox actually moved over by the grass I was telling you about earlier and sit down by it. Just a beautiful, beautiful animal. And just a few more pretty pictures. And I want to know if you want to share with me what's on your 2022 list. I mean, tell me about the big trips you got coming up. Tell me about the gear you hope to buy. Tell me about anything good that you hope to try to accomplish in 2022. I'd love to hear them and share them with everybody if anybody wants to. And while we're talking about that, while I'm waiting on people to type in, if you have any questions or comments about anything or any of the pictures I looked at, feel free to type them in. We had a lot of questions coming in there for a while, and we've still got people who are with us. And I don't know if people ran out of questions or what happened, but if you've got any more questions, just feel free to jump in there and I'll get them answered for you. Kevin Mcallister. If y'all don't catch the reference, Kevin Mcallister is the kid on Home Alone, and he's with us today. And so he says he hopes to make great friends with his brother Buzz, and he said great webinar. He appreciates how it turned out, and I appreciate you too. I actually know who Kevin is on this one, so I appreciate Kevin. He's a great dude, and always like to hear when people buzz in on this stuff. So again, if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in there, or any comments or anything else. I'm going to go ahead and go to my obligatory stay in touch slide that I always do and talk through this a little bit. This is actually before I bought my farm. This is a picture from my farm right here when it snowed one year with some hay sitting on the farm. Stay in touch. I got a couple more comments coming in, so I want to touch on those before you go. There's my email address, russell@russellgraves.com. I always answer emails. I may be a day or two late, but I always get to them. So if you have any questions or comments beyond this, let me know. Always happy to help. Always glad to get to know you guys better and get to meet people out on the trip. I know Sammy's in here right now. We had visited quite a bit, both on these webinars as well as via email, and it was such a pleasure to get to meet on one of these on one of these trips here recently. And let's see, got a few questions coming in. I'll answer those. So I'm gonna leave that slide up. If you want to take down my email address, feel free to stay in touch. Tony says, thanks again for sharing your photo knowledge and thoughts. It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Tony. Hope to see you again on the trip soon. I know you've been going out on some. We just haven't crossed paths yet, but it's I hope you're enjoying retirement. And then Kevin Mcallister says, if we don't chat between now and then, have a Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you too, brother. Hope it's a good one for you. Noel asked, what lens combination do you take to Africa? I'm going to take, when I go, I'm going to take my 500 millimeter f4. I'm going to take my 800 millimeter just to have it. And then I'm probably going to take, I bought a new lens and I don't have it here by me right now. I think it's packed away. I bought a new 24 to 104 lens. I'd never owned that lens before, but that's a pretty nice lens, I think. And so I'll have a little bit of a gap between the 100 millimeter and 500 millimeter range, but I think that's going to be okay, but we'll see. And then Stan says, thanks, Russell. All the best to you and yours. Hope to see you in 2022. I'm going to brag about Stan a little bit. Stan, I usually don't say last names, but I will on this. Stan Holmes, I've been following his carving work that he does of birds on Facebook, and he's a talented dude. You need to check out what Stan does on Facebook. And I saw the kestrel the other day, and that was just beautiful, Stan. I'm going to hit you up one day to commission a piece for me for one of our beautiful Texas quail species that we have. Sharon says, love the presentation. My goal is to take my first guided wildlife trip, and I'm looking at different outfits, and so far I really like your personality and the way you teach. I appreciate that, Sharon. Come on with us. I'm not going to say that we're better than everybody else, but I'm going to say we're better than everybody else. And I say it with tongue in cheek, but whether you go with me or somebody else in the crew, we got a great crew. We're like one big family. We get along great. It's got a good bunch of great people in the company, and everybody without regard. And I'll say this, I'm a contractor for the company. I'm not a day-to-day employee, but I'll say this about the company. There is not one person at Backcountry Journeys that doesn't have the guest's best interests at heart. You know, we're human and we have to deal with things that are out of our control sometimes. But I guarantee you, me, myself included, we're always trying, and we're always trying hard to make it a memorable experience for everybody. Sometimes things like COVID don't let things work out like they're supposed to. Sometimes the wildlife that we think is going to be there may not be there in the numbers that we saw them just the day before, but those things happen. But we love our guests. We love the people that travel with us. We love taking people out and getting to see the world, on whether it's me or Ben or Grant or Trevor or Kenton or Matt or any other guides that we have. Everyone has their own little niche of things they love. They love to teach, and more importantly, they love people and love to serve people. And that's, I think, as long as we stick with that, our company is going to continue to be successful. Let's see. Rob says, another hour well spent. Thanks. And lots of good information. And Rob says, have a terrific Christmas. You too, Rob. I appreciate it. Don says he's going to learn some astrophotography. I think that's on my list too. And I've seen people doing that deep space photography. And I don't know if my brain can work to that level of complication, but it looks pretty interesting to try to take pictures of things like deeper space objects like Saturn and things like that. And Pat says, gotta run, have a Merry Christmas. And that is, I think, the last comment I've got. I will stick around for just another minute or two if anybody has any other questions or comments. But if not, again, I want to say Merry Christmas from Dodge City, Texas, here at Hackberry Farm. We're looking forward to a little bit of downtime, looking forward to spend time with family and friends and just catching up and getting to commune with not only our family, but also all the nature that's around us. And again, I want to double down on this again. If you have any questions for me, just feel free to send them to me after the webinar. And if not, I don't see any more questions coming in. It's 1:07 p.m. We're a little bit late on running over on the presentation, but I appreciate everyone sticking with me, and hope everyone has a Merry Christmas. Take care, guys.